let's talk about books. These are the books I read in November. Really a pretty great month, which coming off of the couple of months that I'd had before that is exciting. Also, some books in here that I've wanted to finish for a long time, which always feels good. I have had Perfect Me by Heather Widows for over a year probably, which is a pretty dense moral philosophy book. She's like one of the foremost beauty researchers writing these days. And Wuthering Heights I had read 77 pages of who knows how many years ago, and along with Great Expectations finishing that one was one of my only reading goals for the year. I don't really do reading goals, but I was like, you should finish these two classics that you haven't. So that was good. I did not know about the movie when I decided to read it, but we'll get there. The first one I read is called The Duke Who Didn't, and as I mentioned in the last video, it has a classic clinch, is what this cover is called. Classic romance cover. So first of all, this, where do I set it? Okay, so the New York Times does a year-end list of books. A lot of places do a year-end list of books. Often I've enjoyed the New York Times one. This year, different story. They put these summer storms on it, which was terrible. It was so unedited. I don't even want to say poorly edited. And along with a couple of the other things that made that list, it just made me not care about it, like on principle. I do not like this list. So, except for, I will say, so they pick 100, 50 fiction, 50 nonfiction. A decent chunk I hadn't heard of, which I do like because that means they're picking some like underdog books or small press or ones that haven't gotten the hype that maybe they deserve. So that is fun. Anyway, because this list is kind of such a big deal, the New York Times has started releasing like quarterly, will they, won't they? Maybe these books will make the lists. So I think it was the halfway through the year list had 2 romances on it. And I always say whenever the New York Times puts a fun book on the list, I'm really curious about it because they don't really do that very much. That's how... the reject books go in my closet, and they're stacked vertically, which makes them very hard to get out. I need to fix that. And it's so much easier to be a reject book than it used to be now that my shelves are full. Used to everything was on the shelves, and now every time after a video, I have to put the books that I love and value onto the shelves, so more books come off. But I also like having my boxes and picture frames and stuff on here, so a problem for another day. But I did, for you, the people, just dig this out. It had probably 20 books on top of it, but this is actually a fantastic book. It's moved to the closet is not indicative of what a good book it is. I just don't keep a lot of romance on the shelf. Just basically my two or three faves. So this is called The Wisteria Society of Lady Scoundrels. It was New York Times Notable Book of the Year. I thought, how curious. I looked for it for a long time, finally found it, super enjoyed it. It has magical realism, so Teddy, don't read it. But if you love historical romance and don't mind a bit of magic, it is so fun. So there's 3 in the series. The first 2 were incredible. The third one totally fell off for me. Which when I was editing last one, I think I found like 3 times that I hadn't caught myself. So we'll keep working on that this time. So the New York Times often doesn't put fun books on the list. They often put really long nonfiction on the list. A couple of my, or at least one of my least favorite books I read this year, I grabbed off the list last year. So I've cooled down on that. Nevertheless, the point of a list, much like their best books of the century list, is, for me at least, to talk about it. which is super fun. So on the halfway through the year list, there were 2 romances. August Lane by Regina somebody, I think is what it's called, and The Earl Who Isn't by Courtney Milan, book 3 in the Wedgeford Trials is what this series is called. And so I ordered this. I bet on the wrong one. The Earl Who Isn't did not make the final list, and August Lane did. And that one's set in the South, and I think I'm interested in it. So maybe I will read that. But anyway, I wasn't going to start with the 3rd in a series. I've done it on accident, but never on purpose. So I read The Duke Who Didn't, which is a very silly title, except it actually kind of works with the story. It's not just a dumb title. We've talked about romance covers before, and I think I mentioned, so this is a coffee table book from the podcast 99% Invisible, which you absolutely should listen to. I've loved so many of their episodes, and one of their producers' moms wrote a romance book. Hang on. I'm just getting all the props today. So this book is called A False Proposal. It's by Pamela Mingle. Her daughter, Katie Mingle, is a producer on this podcast. And when her daughter saw her book, which looked like this, she said, "Mom, why did you let them make your fantastic book look so dumb?" And then, to answer that question, she researched the history of romance covers, which we talked about in one of the other videos, and it was super interesting. So anyway, I like to give a little respect to an old school cover, even though now they usually are cartoon. I don't really know the best way to say that, but I think this was like a high 3-star book. It did a couple of things that romances don't usually do that I found really charming. And so even though it wasn't my favorite, I really appreciated that. So the characters communicate really well the whole time, which like is great. Miscommunication can often slow the pace down in a way that's really annoying. So think about whatever the second Windy City book was. They're having this important conversation. Someone walks in, so the conversation stops, and they don't wrap up that conversation for like 8 more days or something, which is so unnecessary and annoying to the reader. And you don't want to be annoying to the reader. So in this one, whatever one of them would have a problem, they'd be like, "Oh, I'm feeling this way." And the other one would be like, "Well, you often feel this way when this happens, and maybe you need to look at this or think about it in this other way." Like, how hard is that? So I really enjoyed that. It was silly, and I thought it was going to be silly and really good. And then by the time it got to the end, it was just silly fun. There was, the way the story wrapped up was pretty silly, but it was silly in a way that lowered the stakes, which normally romance books do not do. So that's something that I like totally respected, even as I wanted maybe a little bit more from it. Like, it was almost the opposite of what you get in a lot of books, which is the 3rd act breakup trope. So in the 3rd act, the final act of the book, to just add some drama or whatever, the characters break up or they come against this insurmountable obstacle, something really dramatic happens. And I really love the opposite. This is also this takes place in the UK in a town called Wedgeford, and it's a town of immigrants who can afford to live in this town because the Duke does not collect rent. And so over the course of England's colonial history, they would be in China or whatever, and they would hire a nanny, or they would capture people and bring them back to the UK. And then in this author's conception of the world, these people find their way to this little town where they're able to build kind of a life for themselves because the structures of charging people rent and not paying them are not in place like they are in the rest of the country. So that was a really fun little invention. It actually is kind of like what Shonda Rhimes made Bridgerton into, but the Bridgerton books are not integrated like the show is, I'm pretty sure. So super, it was just fun. And it did have the thing that really bothers me with like when it describes something existing physically and you're like, that's not how matter works. So like there's this one, well, the female main character is really into like lists and getting things done, and she's very put together, and so she always has her hair in this perfect bun, and this is this thing that like the male main character always notices. And then they're riding to run this errand on a horse, and they fall off the horse, and just like from falling off the horse onto the ground, like her entire hair like falls out. And like I don't actually think if it was so tight that the entire book, because she's been doing all these other active things, not a hair has moved, I don't think it would just fall out, because she didn't even hit the ground. Anyway, things like that, but could be fun. I think I'm gonna try keeping them all in a little spot today. Okay. Guys, I'm really excited about this next one. I told you it was a good month. Okay. This is the same book. This is the mass market paperback version. If you're like, what does that mean? Anytime you see a book that's very tiny and costs like $6, it's called mass market. And they sell them at like grocery stores and airports and stuff. This is not my copy. This was given to Sarah Kate by her grandmother, and I will be returning it to her. Therefore, when I loved it, I had to buy my own copy from eBay, and it has been through some mites is what makes this on a book. I think I have not done any of my own research on this, but I have heard from various people in my life who love to read that you need to put books in the freezer when you get them, maybe from the library, maybe from eBay, because that kills mites. And if you put a book on your shelf that has mites, then the mites can eat all of your books, which would be terrible. So although I have not followed up on that, I did put this in the freezer when I got it. I also always sanitize books with like what you would clean a counter with when I get them. So all that to say, I was talking to Sarah Kate at her 30th and complaining about how I cannot find a mystery that I like. You guys know this. I really have only tried Gone Girl and maybe one other one this year, but I had a rough go of it last year and was feeling like there was nothing out there for me. And then Mary Stewart came into my life. So guys, I really loved this book. I had so much fun reading it. The reason I'm trying to find a mystery I like is because I like to read widely. I like to read every genre. It's important to me. And I also like to have shelf talkers, which is a little summary of why a book is great, on a card in every section of the store. And I have not found a mystery or thriller that I can recommend. And although I love this book so much, it does not solve that problem because it was published in 1965 and Mary Stewart is no longer in print. So we can't get it in the store, but I knew that while I was reading and really enjoying it. And now we're just going to talk about it, and you can A, buy it on eBay, or B, request the copy from, I think the Tulsa City County Library System has a single copy. Raw has it right now. And I should say, did not adore it as much as I did. She kind of got stuck in it, and she reads and enjoys a lot of mysteries. So who's to say, but I will now say why I at least was in love with it. Also, it is one of those old books where they put a giant photo of the author on the back, which is so funny. And I have one other book. Yeah, so like your description is on your dust jacket. Hang on, I'll show you the other one that does that. This book I adore. It's called Love is a Wild Assault, which is a terrible title, but it's from a poem before the word assault was used in the legal sense so frequently. And this one has the author's photo on the back. As I'm saying that, I think the other version had the author's photo on it. And my mom put it on this one because it was so funny, but really that's what they used to do, which doesn't seem very relevant to a book, which is probably why they don't do that much anymore. This is such a fun historical fiction book set in Texas. It's hard to find as well. That copy is from eBay as well. But for now. So Sarah Kate hands me this. I'm like, I'll read it. I read this sentence off the back. Vanessa March never thought to look for her missing husband in Vienna. And I'm like, okay. So Vanessa March is a young newlywed. She's been married for a year or two. I summarized this entire book for my parents on FaceTime because I was so excited about it, and I'm trying to tell myself not to do that right now, especially so you can read it, but also because that's not something I'm not trying to spoil it. So she is a newlywed and she's getting lunch with this woman who's kind of an acquaintance that she finds really annoying. And the woman's like, how are you? She's like, fine, my husband's on a business trip in Stockholm. And the woman's like, oh, I thought he was in Vienna. She's like, and the woman's like, well, I saw him on the newsreel. There was a circus fire or something in Vienna and someone died and he was in the video. Like, I swear it was him. Also, I was wondering if you're going to Vienna to meet up with him, can you take my nephew or my son? My son. And she's like, I will get back with you. So she goes to the exact movie theater because back in the day, you had to go to see the newsreel before the movie. You had to buy a movie ticket and then you had to go to the right movie theater that was playing that newsreel. So she finds out which one it is and she goes and she sees her husband and he's not in Stockholm, he's in Vienna. So you're like, this man is a scoundrel and this is gonna be bad, which is what you're supposed to feel at the beginning of this type of book. So she calls back the annoying friend. She's like, I actually am going to Vienna, miscommunication, but I've now heard from Lewis and he is in Vienna and I can take your son. And the woman's son, she's divorced from the kid's father and the father has invited the son to join him in Vienna. So you're on the plane with this unlikely pairing of a 17-year-old boy and this young 20-something, 25-year-old woman. And he's being kind of like sullen and moody and she finally like is like, we're stuck together, whatever. But what turns out is not only is she lying about her family in Vienna, which she doesn't know anything about where her husband is and he doesn't know she's coming. He also is lying about his father expecting him. He hasn't actually talked to his father at all. And that's kind of the setup for what turns into just this romp through the Austrian countryside. And it's so fun. I think part of what I loved is the historical fiction and like the old way to use, like all of the language is old and there's things that you just wouldn't, like you're kind of learning things while it's happening. And I loved that. Dakota, you're being noisy. You're scrambling my thoughts. Hi, you wanna lie down? Try this. Down. Dakota interlude. This book was so charming. It was so fun. I loved the action. I loved the characters, the dynamic of the 17-year-old boy and then the woman, and they're trying to figure out what's happening as they're getting involved in this mystery is so fun. And the book was so fun. I really, really loved it. So it's called Airs Above the Ground because that's what the tricks the Lipizzaner horses do. The Lipizzaner horses are these white horses in Vienna that perform a dance basically and jumps and stuff, and they're part of the story, which is why you see them on both versions of the cover. So I recommend this. I just did my very best not to spoil it because the part that I loved I can't say but it really was so fun. And so there, maybe my route into mystery is going to be kind of historical mystery, but I read the Maisie Dobbs book, which is another big one, and that did not work for me, but it was too wordy, and Mary Stewart understands the economy of language, so props for that. The next book I read was Beezus and Ramona by Beverly Cleary. I will say that I read Ramona the Pest as a kid, but I don't think I read this one. So this is the first one, there's 8. Ramona the Pest is the second one, but this one's fun because it's told from Beezus's perspective, which I did not know was a thing. I also did not realize this book came out in 1955, which is incredible. I would have said 90s, maybe 80s. And no, it's been out. My mom told me she read it when she was a kid. It's precious and amazing. It does such a good job of portraying sibling relationships and what the frustrations actually look like when you're a kid, so you don't have a lot of autonomy, and then also you're stuck with this other kid who doesn't have autonomy and you're different, but you have to be together all the time. And it was so precious. It was so fun. I think I will keep reading them. Who knows how far, but Another one, this is an early reader book. It's great. So you can see the words are pretty big. It's great because it also has big pictures. So this style of book, and usually you can just tell what it is because it's about this thin, is really good for kids who are learning to read and need something harder than a picture book, but are not ready for something like this quite yet, which is, you know, words on every page. So these can be really fun. This one was fine. It is about a princess who's also a spy. So a fun challenge I gave myself at the shop is to try and get little boys to buy it by telling them it's about a spy, which is a pretty hard sell because when you look at it, it says princess. So I'll let you know if I get any success with that. Strangely, the horse in it, who's her trusty steed, is named Blackie, which is a racial slur, which seems like a massive oversight and left me with a bad taste in my mouth because this was written not by children, but by adults. And you can name it Horsey if you want to go for something really obvious and cutesy. So that's strange. But anyway, Shannon Hale is the author of, it's by Shannon Hale and Dean Hale. I don't think I said the title, The Princess in Black. There's a ton of them in the series. They defeat all sorts of monsters. Shannon Hale wrote Princess Academy, which is a middle grade book that I loved growing up. So I will have to see if I still love that one. Maybe reread it. But I'm mid on Princess in Black. I would go Ivy and Bean if you need a super illustrated, easy entry kid series to go for. Guys. Okay, Dakota was kind of loud during the last one. So we'll see how she's doing now. But I left it because I didn't want to re-film it, so hope that didn't bug you too much. The next book I read is called Rebel with a Claws. I DNF'd this, so I should say the next book I did not read was Rebel with a Claws, which is a great title by Ellen Joven. This was such a bad book because it was not meant to be a book. Ellen loves grammar and lives in New York City and set up a table outside of a subway stop with a sign that said grammar table and encouraged people to approach her to talk about grammar. And then had so much fun, I think I have this right, that she decided to go to all 50 states to set up the grammar table and also to film this for a documentary. Now, the entire book she's telling you about filming for a documentary. Because she's filming, she has word for word transcriptions of her conversations with people, very few of which are interesting, because they were not meant to be a book, they were meant to be a documentary. I do not know why this book was written. Oh, shoot. Come here, puppy. I know you're tired of being left alone. I know. Come on. What'd you say?
I'm never gonna film it.
Okay, lie down. I'm gonna put a sleeping spell on you. Go in here. Oh. Okay. I think she's resting for now. I grabbed this while I was up. This is an example of a book about grammar that was written to be a book that is pretty readable and you learn a lot. You can see the bold, you can see little illustrations. This is called Grammar Girls Quick and Dirty Tips for Better Writing. It has been out forever, but it's pretty friendly, approachable, and well written. Feel free to go look for that. This one, the author spent so much of the book explaining to you why this project was so interesting. Usually if you have to tell someone that something is interesting, it is not actually interesting, especially when you're writing a book. I don't think that's true conversationally, but if you're saying, isn't it so silly that this person said this? If you're cracking jokes, but you're not a very skilled humor writer, but really the biggest issue is that so many of these pages are just, like I said, transcripts of conversations. And that's actually not a very great jumping off point for teaching grammar to a reader, if that's what you're trying to do. It's also not really clear that that's what she's trying to do, because it's not clear what she's trying to do. except say, I had this super cool idea to sit at a table and talk about grammar, and I'm going to tell you all about it. She organized this book by grammar feature, and then she went through the videos and she would find 8 conversations she had about the Oxford comma, and then she would print them. It was a mess. And it's also features this map showing the places that she went. Granted, I think she got to all of them except Connecticut because of the pandemic. It's actually not very interesting because you know where the states are, and it doesn't really matter where she set up the table. So I was so unimpressed by this book. Never read it. Even though I love grammar. Isn't that a bummer? Casey got it for me, which is such a good gift. Like, you would think that would be a slam dunk. The next book I read is called The Great Jilly Hopkins by Catherine Patterson. And this was a book I had never heard of. This author wrote Bridge to Terabithia, which I had heard of, obviously, because the movie came out when I was that age. This is a book about a little girl in foster care who gets moved to a new home and what goes from there. Maybe she's bored because she can't read. Hey, Dakota.
You?
I know.
Ma'am? Didn't you just staring at the thing?
I heard about this book on a back to school podcast The Daily did. The New York Times podcast is called The Daily, and they had some of their book reviewers on, and one of them mentioned this is just like an incredible classic that she doesn't want forgotten. It was either that reviewer or one of the other ones who had said something about how Betsy Tacy is also just incredible, and one of the people on the pod hadn't heard of it. And I think that's probably what made me associate this with, like, if this is someone else's book they love, like, I love Betsy Tacy, I have to read it. And I do always love finding a good elementary and middle grade book and reading ones that were published a while ago and seeing, you know, if they're still worth getting in kids' hands. So I'm gonna read my review on this one and then we'll go from there, because I feel like it balanced the two different ways I felt about this book pretty well. The fat phobia in this was extreme, super distracting and super off-putting, and present on almost every page. Trotter, which is the foster mom, was such an incredible character too. She deserved better. Jilly, who's the kid, Jilly's character transformation was perfectly executed. She was really so awful in the beginning. Racist too. The ending was admirably savage, severe, and then I said realistic. But the fat phobia, what a tough draw. So when I have an issue with fat phobia in a book is when it's not one of the characters' conviction, when you can feel the author's opinion that fat people are bad bleeding through the page. So there was a Substack article that went kind of viral that Emma Copley Eisenberg, who wrote Housemates, she wrote an article about how she thought all fours was fat phobic. But I disagreed because she's taking issue with the narrator in the book being fat phobic towards another character in the book. But I really believed that that narrator was just that terrible of a person. Like, it didn't seem to me like it was the author overstepping in any type of way. In this one, oh my gosh, it was like so distracting, so problematic, and it was the way that it was written. It wasn't just Jilly judging her foster mom for being fat. It was like every time the woman was referenced, the way that she moved through the room or whatever, the author would say it in a way that was really dehumanizing and completely unnecessary. So that was such a drag, especially because the foster mom is just such an amazing character. And the story told in this book is really beautiful. And Jilly ends up at her house and has been kicked out of a bunch of different places, and she's really mischievous, and the foster mom is just totally able to handle her and love her. And the transformation, like I said, was incredible. And also it doesn't have like a pat happy ending in a way that I thought it worked, but it was really shocking. It wasn't like a tragic ending, it was just realistic, like I said. So anyway, both of them were fantastic characters. This was totally slowed down by the crummy writing choices. So if you want to read it, you totally can. It's not going to hold back. But if you want to read a book about fat phobia, I would read this one. This is my favorite one. You also could read on shrinking, which is over here. Or this one by Aubrey Gordon. She has a podcast that you should listen to called Maintenance Phase. It was a bummer. It was a real bummer. Okay, the next book I read is The Correspondent by Virginia Evans. This one is so popular right now. It's an epistolary book, so it's told entirely through letters and emails. The main character is maybe 72 to 90 through the course of the book, which I think is a really great age range. And I would recommend this book, even though I didn't love this book. So when I say that, it's usually because I think it's well written. I have a really hard time recommending a book that I think is poorly written, because there are just enough books out there that are well written that no one needs to read Rebel with a Clause, for example. So that's why I can recommend this, even though it wasn't my book. It wasn't something that I loved, because I know there are people who love this and who will love this. And to me, it just felt a little bit like a book. When I read fiction, I want to be so submersed in it, which we'll get to that with the next one, Wuthering Heights, that every character feels real and what's happening feels real. And I never believed in this book enough. And I that's it. I think in my review I said, each sentence was well written though. Charming perhaps, but it didn't charm me, which is kind of savage. But it's charming everyone else, and it just got to the New York Times, the #1 spot on the New York Times bestseller list, even though it came out in May. So this is kind of interesting. I don't know if maybe I've said this before, but most books, when they come out and they sell the most at the beginning, and then their sales drop off. And then if it comes out again in paperback, the sales will go up. They'll go on another paperback book tour, and then the sales will drop off, basically into eternity. And then, like, for example, Airs Above the Ground, the book will eventually go out of print, unless it's a classic. And what makes something a classic is that people talk about it enough that people keep reading it, such that it's profitable for publishing houses to keep publishing it. So then something that came out in 1946, like this one, I think, stays in print. That means that the majority of books that were published in 1946 are not books that you could access or get, or would not come across in a new bookstore, because they're not still being published new. That's why it's so fun, I think, to get a book like Love is a Wild Assault or Airs Above the Ground that's out of print and not a classic. I just love when that happens. And there are so many wonderful books that A, you'll never get to read, which is why I read so much, because I want to read as many as I can, but B, so many wonderful books that you kind of have to dig to find. So that being said, it's interesting when a book has moderate sales that then go up over the course of it being out in hardcover. And often when that happens, it's because of word of mouth. So people read this and love it and tell people to read it and tell more people to read it and tell more people to read it. And the New York Times had a really interesting article about that one for Remarkably Right Creatures. which was this book. Similar sales trajectory, it went this way instead of this way, which is super fun for the writers. Both of these books are about old women as the main characters, which I love. These are two other old woman main character books that I adore. This one is basically Great British Bake Off fanfic, almost. I love this cover. The paperback cover is different. And then this one, it's about a grandma, a mother, and the daughter. And it's narrated from the daughter's perspective, but so good. Then I read Wuthering Heights, which I got this gorgeous used copy many years ago because it's a classic. And when you know something's a classic, sometimes you just buy it with knowing nothing else. I had started it. I had not finished it. Like I said, decided to finish it this year. I am also just going to read the review of Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte from my legal book. Some people call it a classic, but I just call it a bummer. In a remote spot in England, terrible people are terrible to each other. It was well constructed and well written, and the characters felt real. What was the deeper meaning? Misery lasts until death, but only usually? Not for our final pair. I'm as cynical as the next person, but reading 250 pages of people yelling at and hitting and locking each other up is a bit much. Wildly, a third or a quarter of the way in, I was spontaneously reminded of The Favorites with all the unnecessary drama. And only then did I remember that The Favorites is a rewrite of Wuthering Heights. Impressive, Lane Fargo. So The Favorites is a book I read earlier this year, and I shall show it to you. Hang on. This is The Favorites by Lane Fargo. It's an ice dancing book. It is so dishy and soapy and other kitchen metaphors. And it was said to be a rewrite of Wuthering Heights, and I thought, nonsense, which is so unnecessarily like elitist. Like classics are retold all of the time to different degrees of seriousness and fun, and that is wonderful. So it was great for me to be surprised by remembering that while reading Wuthering Heights. I think I would pick Jane Eyre over Wuthering Heights, and I have not read Jane Eyre. So I can't really say that, except that it wasn't my fave. Here comes the dog. Get it. I'm gonna do it from Come on. Come here. Okay. I might resume.
Good luck, bro.
The next book I read was Homegoing by Ya Jessie. This is a work of fiction. The curtains are closed and she can't get through. Can you call her?
What?
Say it again.
Ma'am?
There we go. There we go. I think I have 3 books left. Okay, should I go?
You try.
Homegoing is a work of historical fiction, and it follows two strands of the same family that get separated because of the slave trade. So it starts in the 1700s, and it's two sisters, and it bounces back and forth. The chapters go back and forth between descendants from each of the two sisters. It is really strong in how it used powers of selection, so you don't see the entirety of every chapter is a different person. You don't see the entirety of their life. You see this specific snapshot of a chunk of it that gives you exactly what you need to know about them and about that period in history. It spans 300 years. It goes up to the present day, and the research that must have gone into that was so incredible, and all used only for the purpose of telling the story really well. You didn't feel like you were reading someone's research. The beginning, I wouldn't say the beginning was the strongest. It was strong throughout. The ending was a little bit weak for me, but it also, there was one thing I was worried it was gonna do that was gonna be kind of like a cheap trick, and it didn't do that. So points there. The stories of each successive generation, it was really masterfully done how she moved the people through time and how you got to see the different phases of history that needed to be represented both in Africa and in America. So of the two descendants, one gets taken to America on a slave ship, and that story stays in America the whole time. The other descendant stays in Africa, and that was also so cool reading about hundreds of years of history in Africa and the ways that colonialism affected villages and peoples over time, because that was something that happened for like hundreds of years. And so sometimes it would be working with the British, sometimes it would be a village that was really far into the bush, and so they weren't super affected by things. There were also just droughts and things that are not geopolitical, but that still affect life in a village or wherever the family lived at the time. She did a great job of giving everyone distinctive personalities, a love story. So often that was when you would really connect with that character in that chapter, was whenever they fell in love or found someone that they wanted to give up everything for. And you can see that it's not a long book. To do all of that in fewer than 300 pages is, wait, let's see, it might be 300 exactly. It is 300 exactly. Is really incredible. So this was a really, really impressive book, and I really enjoyed it while I was reading it. There were some parts that were so hard and so dark, and also that wasn't the overall feeling the book left you with, or even gave you while you were reading it, which is really, really impressive. Then I read Perfect Me by Heather Widdows, which also you could call it Perfect Me. I love a book with a double title. The other one that I think of is Minor Feelings by Kathy Park Hong. She's a poet, and her subtitle was An Asian American Reckoning, and she was like, it can be like a statement about this book. This is a reckoning, or it can be a description of me, an Asian American reckoning, which is cool. And Heather Widdows did the same thing with this book. This is not a book I recommend reading because it is so dense, and it is written in the style of moral philosophy. So it is more similar to reading any of these little guys down here, are school philosophy books, than to something like Unshrinking or a modern nonfiction book about a topic that you are super interested in. I actually would say if I would go for something super approachable, and this is history, so it's different from philosophy, but you can have a really cleanly written book of history. I'm going to start putting books back on the shelf because I'm running out of room. something like Our Secret Society by Tanisha C. Ford would be great. If you are a philosopher and you're being published by Princeton University Press, you might write a book where the structure of the book is what you are expected to do in philosophy. So every chapter has an introduction and it has a conclusion. They say the exact same thing. Like, that's what the philosophers are doing, and I will not tell them differently. That's why this book of moral philosophy was really impressive, because Kate Mann is in academia and also was able to write a pretty readable book that did not have the clunkiness of the style that you expect from philosophy, but also built each chapter like you would hope an argument about ethics would be built. And that was super cool. So I am not going to say this wasn't well written, because it was written in the style of what it is, but I only read it because it was for a Substack article I was working on, and also just a lot of the writing that I do centers around beauty, culture, and what beauty means in our culture, and so I needed to read this for my writing and mind, and it was so good for that. Their way that she looks at beauty is so lucid and logical, but also willing to look at the cultural context around it. I really don't like the work it takes to put text onto the video, but if I did not mind that, or if I had thought of this earlier and could just do it on a piece of paper right here, I would have done a Dakota count. For the number of times she has blessed us with her presence in this video. Like my count last time. Now she's in the chords, so if you fall over, that's because of her. Oh, she ducked him. What a smart cookie. You are cute. Do you want to hear me talk about beauty? I don't think I can talk about perfect me while petting you. It takes too much focus. You have to make yourself easy for me to pet. Touch. Okay, we can try this. Did you know I'm not a dog person? Okay, well, one thing that I'm struggling with this one is that I just want to tell you everything it says, because I think arguments and thoughts about beauty are so interesting, and I think this book needs to exist, and I have been talking about it the whole time I was reading it. It would just come up in conversation, and it was so, okay, you can't like grunt while I'm petting you, because the whole point of me petting you is that you're being quiet. Okay, so I'm just gonna read some of the parts that I marked that are so interesting while placating this precious dog. Well, she's talking about the requirements of beauty and how those are new. And one of the things she says is being camera ready is increasingly a requirement. And given that we can imagine ourselves being photographed in almost any context, this demand is extensive. True. And new, right? Like since I have grown up. This is talking about pretty privilege in terms of first impressions. Good girl. Even if other features are more important over the long term, other features meaning actually being good at a job or being kind or whatever, in both employment and relationships, there is likely to be benefit from being well perceived initially, which is so true, right? Like first impressions can matter quite a bit. Talking about assumptions in makeover culture, the malleable body is one, and that the body is malleable is a new assumption. Interesting. Body work is another one, the like before and after that you should always be. Our expectation is that hard work on the body will pay off, that it will result in a better us, by which we mean a better body and a better self. The reasons for the increased dominance of appearance are multifaceted and complex. So you can hear kind of the like annoying language, the philosopher type of language. Some of the sentences are just kind of hard to get through. The more committed to the beauty ideal we are, the more committed to the beauty ideal we are, the more demanding it is. Likewise, the more our sense of self is determined by appearance, the more we judge ourselves and others by appearance, and the more we invest our identity in appearance and less in other capabilities. True. Interesting. I've always thought that. I think that's so interesting. While it might be positive in the short term, in the longer term, it is illusory. And I really appreciated so much of this book. I appreciate someone looking at something that is often seen as frivolous really seriously, and I found it super helpful with what I was writing. Okay, quiet. Oh, this is good. We tend to articulate our engagement in beauty practices as if they were freely chosen, as if they were practices we wish to engage in, even though we sometimes feel they are burdensome and sometimes we do them grudgingly. Even when we say we have to do something, such as shave before going to the swimming pool or put on makeup before a big night out, we still tend to think of these practices as chosen, things we could equally not do if we chose. This rhetoric of choice is dominant and often unquestionably assumed to be accurate, which is ridiculous, right? Because if you don't choose beauty behaviors, there are consequences. I don't know if you can hear the party people. Maybe you should go with them, Dakota. Yeah, they'd wear you out so fast. You don't want that. You want to be an insy girl, which means you have to be content to be indoors and calm. Okay, so the last thing I'll say about Widows is that she defines beauty as thinness, smoothness, firmness, and youth. And those are the four main things where if you look at what is considered beautiful in a way that, like beauty as capital, which Macmillan Cottom writes about in Thick a lot, which I will get down once I can stop touching Dakota. Though that's how you can define beauty as capital. And I really appreciate her defining it because it's something that's so hard to talk about because we believe that people have to be beautiful. So if you choose behavior that makes you not thin, smooth, firm, or young, or you become one of those things because of like age is inevitable, it's hard to talk about what it means to no longer be beautiful, because we're always supposed to say that everyone's beautiful because beauty is seen as an ethical good, a moral good. It equates to who we are. And that's the argument she really makes here, is that beauty is seen as and is now an ethical ideal that is becoming really dominant, which is horrifying. She also says beauty is required in contexts where it didn't used to be. So during illness, during pregnancy, and in old age, which is true, and also a bummer, like give you at least some minute where you can opt out, but no rest. Wait. This essay collection has a fantastic essay on beauty called In the Name of Beauty, I think. 2 books, Dakota. Can we do it? Can we do it? The next book I read was The Best American Food and Travel Writing from 2025. All of the essays are from 2024, which the title is misleading, but I guess they just name it that because you're buying it at the end of 2025, and it does take a year to edit and such. The intro essay by the series editor was great, and then Bryant Terry's essay slowed me down like a speed bump that is actually a wall. So then I DNF'd his essay. Then I started just reading random essays from the collection in whatever order I wanted from the table of contents. Then when I finally went back to his essay, I realized that was the opposite of what he wanted to do. He was very intentional about how he grouped them all with their buddies. And so that didn't really work. I felt like there was one of these I loved called How to Eat a Rattlesnake by an author who is from Oklahoma. There was one from The Bitter Southerner called Black Earth. The Bitter Southerner always gets like at least 2 essays in this collection, and I love the work they do there. And then there was one more I liked called One Mixed Dozen, written by a woman who grew up in like suburban Boston, about working at Dunkin' and then leaving the Boston area and what Dunkin' means. And I thought it was really great. The rest of them, some were better, some were less fun to me, some I didn't really vibe with. There were a lot of ones that were serious and thoughtful without being artful or interesting, lending the collection overall to be kind of a bummer. So that's what I have to say. Y'all know that I loved, this is the collection of all of them. I've liked some of those better than others, and I really like this. I really like this collection and read it every year. There are other ones, if you're not as interested in food and travel, there's a science and nature writing one, which I've always wanted to read, but it's such a big commitment to read so many essays. And I just got the best essay, just general essay one for me and Teddy for our Christmas book club, and I'm nervous because it's really long, but Gia Tolentino edited it, who wrote Trick Mirror, so we're gonna give it a go. Dakota, one left. Lie down. We've now entered the part of the video where I can maintain eye contact with the dog, who is constantly disobeying me. Okay, see what happens if you call her and we try and just get through one more.
Dakota. You're good. All the way through. You can do it. Whoever.
All right, you ready for this? Guys, the most Dakota featuring, I was trying to think of a word that wasn't infected. Dakota-ified video is almost concluded. It has been chaotic, and I hope it was coherent at least once at some point. So, the last book I read in November is State of Wonder by Ann Patchett. We know Ann Patchett. We love her. She is so talented at writing fiction, and every book is so different. I know that from my jump from Belcanto to Tom Lake. This one is set in the Amazon and Minnesota, and I thought it was impressive. I'm going to read you the review to get us going. This novel started out as a wide, slow spiral, and slowly it tightened, slowly, spiraling and speeding up, and done. That laconic pacing alone was masterful. Everyone was real, the world was real, the entire time I had no clue where the book was going, which is so hard to do that in a way that you also feel comfortable the whole time you're reading it, and you don't feel like you're on unstable ground, which is how I felt for the first maybe 20% of the favorites. If you don't pace something correctly, and if you don't establish the stakes, it's really easy for doing something where you don't have a book, where the reader doesn't know where the book is going, to not be a fun or good reading experience. I have one from next month that was like that, and I quit it after like 60 pages. The entire time I had no clue where the book was going, which is true, which is crazy, because it's a journey book. Like, she journeys from Minnesota to the Amazon. There was so much specificity without it ever getting too wordy. That's hard to do, especially when you've done all this research. That's why I can never write fiction. Like, you might read an entire book and you might not use any of it in the book that you end up writing, or you might just have one sentence that has something specific and realistic to the time or the place in it, and that is so much work. It's so much work, and it's such a joy when someone doesn't get all into their research and they're willing to just give you what you need for the story to be beautiful. The end of the plot was like throwing the book out of a plane, but Patchett had sewn every stitch of the parachute, and then I list some specific things that then came to be important in the end. And the book landed on its feet. Long chapters and long paragraphs and long days in the jungle. Genius ending. I'm editing as I read. What a book. And this is a book with an older-ish narrator. I think she's in her 50s, and she's a pharmacologist at a large pharmaceutical company in Minnesota. Like I said, she's childless, and Ann Patchett, I mentioned in her essay collection, has a great essay about choosing as herself to be childless. And even the way that you say that, like, there's a lack. Not the vibe, not... I think there needs to be a way to describe both sides of a choice as if that is a worthy choice to choose. And I think saying someone is childless, like childless, is not the way to do that. But it is the way I put it in my index because that was the quickest phrase I could think of for the back. This is a wild time. Also, I think it works. And that's cool. I would recommend this. I would listen to an audiobook if you like audiobooks. And it's such a pleasure to read someone who's so talented at writing fiction. I will say there's an interesting story about this book in this book. Big Magic by Liz Gilbert, which was the first time I'd ever heard of this book. So that's something. I picked this up because Roxane Gay put it on her best 10 books of the century list, which we know I found Amazing Adventures of Cavalier and Clay from, and Salvage the Bones. And so I was glad to read it. It was great. We're almost done. Okay, let me tell you my faves. And then we're done. Fine. Super fun. Airs Above the Ground by Mary Stewart. Fine. Really useful, and I love reading about things I care a lot about. And State of Wonder. See, the thing is, I already talked about them all for so long, I don't have to say anything else. So, thank you for watching the Dakota Show, featuring some books. Goodbye. Dakota, come here. Sit. Paws up. 2 paws, darling. Darling. Say bye. Her face isn't even in it. I can't even. Why so formal? Bye, Dakota. Bye.